We are continuing our series in Matthew, and we're going to be done in Matthew come Easter. So really looking forward to that. Be able to line up all of the verses there. So we'll have the resurrection passage there on Easter. So it's going to be really, really cool. But we're continuing our series in Matthew today. And I want to ask you a question just to start out here. How many in here, you've got a phobia? Some kind of phobia. Okay, let's just do a little survey here. Most people don't want to admit that. That's the I don't like to admit I have a phobia. But I'm going to ask you here, how many do not like snakes? You don't like snakes. Come on, let me see your hand. You do not like snakes. Yeah. How many would say you don't like spiders? Oh, okay, got a few more. Especially the fuzzy ones, right? Like, a snake, I feel like I can distance myself. I can kind of figure it out. But a spider, they can get in your coat and stuff. They can and they bite you. Somebody one time told me that on average in a lifetime that 7 spiders crawl in your mouth while you sleep. I believed him for a while, and I had a hard time sleeping because I was like, what if it just, and I open my mouth and one just crawls in there and it's fuzzy. Anyway, not good. How many in here are you have a phobia of heights? I don't like heights. Okay, a few less. What about clowns? Clowns, okay. Jury duty? Anybody have a phobia of jury duty? So I looked up on ChatGPT, of course. I said, hey, give me some phobias, and then all the normal ones came up. And I was like, give me some weird ones. And so it gave me some weird ones. So I'm going to pull them up on the screen. Let's pull up the first one here. Some phobias. All right, I don't even know how to say some of these, but this is the fear of peanut butter sticking to the roof of your mouth. This is a thing, okay? All right, we'll go to the next one here. This is the fear of cheese, okay? The fear of cheese. I do not have a fear of cheese. I have a love for cheese, actually. All right, go to the next one here. All right, so this is the fear of long words.
That's not even true. That is not true.
I feel like a third grader was putting these together a little bit. All right, go to the next one. All right, this is a fear of being without your phone, which is a thing, y'all. Look at the word. Nomophobia. Nomophobia. See, I'm telling you, a third grader did this. And also, I don't know if these are true or not. This was ChatGPT. Sometimes it gets it wrong. So don't fact check me on this. Okay. All right. Next one. Oh, this is the next one. Okay. The fear of the Pope. All right. Again, papaphobia. I don't know. I've never met the guy. So maybe you're afraid of the Pope, though. Okay. Next one. All right. This is the fear that somewhere, somehow, a duck is watching you. Okay, at some point it's a mental disorder, okay? I'm just saying, like, come on now. All right, is there another one? I don't know. Okay, yes, the fear of beards, okay? Pogonophobia. All right, fear of beards, that can be a thing. And I think this is the last, no, there's one more. Okay, the fear of belly buttons. Now listen, there are some belly buttons out there you should be afraid of, okay? The ones that hold lint, nah. We all should be afraid of that. All right, and this is the last one. I have this, the fear of hair, okay? Fear of hair in all of its forms there. Okay, let me ask you, raise your hand if you've ever been afraid of something. Raise your hand. All right, if you did not raise your hand, you were afraid to raise your hand, okay? So we've all been afraid of things. It can take up a lot of space in our lives. In fact, it's one of the 6 primary emotions that we have as humans, so happiness, sadness, disgust, anger, surprise, and fear, okay? And fear isn't always bad. Fear can keep you away from bad things. It can keep you alive. But fear can become bad just like any emotion when it's too much. It can take you down a road that you don't want to go. It can become a way of life. It can put you, in a sense, in prison for your soul. And the worst kind of fear is when you feel like you can't break free from that fear. Feel like you can't break free from that fear. So today, we're going to talk about for a few minutes how to be free from fear. All right, turn to your neighbor right now and say, come on, it's time to get free from fear. Time to get free from fear. The title of today's message is Finally Free from Fear. Finally Free from Fear. And so we're going to look at this passage, this next installment in Matthew, and it's in Matthew 26. We're going to look at this story. To set up a little bit of the context, we know that we covered last week, Judas betrayed Jesus, and now Jesus has been arrested, and it's now, we're going to Caiaphas's house. Okay, Caiaphas was the acting high priest at the time, and so we're going to his house to have this trial for Jesus, and it's in the middle of the night. Okay, Matthew 26, we're going to start in verse 57. Verse 57, if you're ready, say, oh yeah. Okay, verse 57 says this: those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. Now, what was interesting, in that day, the Mishnah was kind of like additional laws, almost like we would have United States laws. So it wasn't the Torah, it wasn't the Old Testament, but these were laws that guided the Jewish people in how to conduct their civil laws. And in that, it said, hey, you can't hold a trial in the middle of the night. And you also can't hold a trial anywhere else but this one location. And instead, they're in the middle of the night holding this trial against Jesus, and they're holding it at Caiaphas's house. Okay, so those who had arrested Jesus took him to Caiaphas, the high priest, where the teachers of the law and the elders had assembled. Verse 58. But Peter followed him at a distance, right up to the courtyard of the high priest. He entered and sat down with the guards to see the outcome. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin, the Sanhedrin would be like the Supreme Court, what we have today would be like the Supreme Court for the Jewish people in Jerusalem in that day. We're looking for false evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. The Old Testament law required that a person couldn't be convicted unless there was two witnesses, at least two witnesses, and they had to agree on what they saw. And so they were struggling to find these witnesses to testify against Jesus. And it says, finally, two came forward and declared, this fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. What's interesting about this statement is that Jesus didn't say that he was going to destroy the temple. He actually said this in John chapter 2, verse 19, said, destroy this temple. In other words, if it were to be destroyed, then in 3 days I will raise it up. Of course, he was talking about his body, a new way of approaching God. The old way was to go to a physical temple, and that was where you would meet with God. Jesus says, no, I'm going to make a new way, and that's what he was talking about. He was not suggesting that he was going to destroy the temple, but these witnesses came forward and said that. Then verse 62, then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, are you going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? Verse 63, but Jesus remained silent. But Jesus remained silent. Man, that just hit me this week as I was preparing this message. You had his own creation. You had God in a body, Jesus, and his own creation is falsely accusing him, and he remained silent. Super powerful. We're going to look at more of that here in just a few minutes. Then the high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. A plaintiff in that day was allowed to use this kind of, I adjure you in the name of God, to answer, and they were legally obligated to respond. And so that's what Jesus does. Verse 64, you have said so, Jesus replied, but I say to all of you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, he has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now we have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? He is worthy of death, they answered. Then this is hard to even read. Then they spit in his face, struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, prophesy to us, Messiah, who hit you? Man, wild story. In the middle of the night, when the darkness was the deepest, this story is also very, very dark. And what's interesting about this is that these leaders had probably likely paid these false witnesses to come testify about Jesus. And then finally the high priest says something, and it's like, all right, come on, tell us, are you the Messiah? And then Jesus just tells the truth, says, yes, I am the Messiah, basically. And because of that, it's like, oh, what else do we need? Now we're going to execute you. What an overreaction to all of this. And while we could have gone a lot of different directions with this message, what I want to focus on is these religious leaders and their core motivation, that they were afraid. And that Jesus was in stark contrast to that in the middle of all of this circumstance. So today I want to give you 3 steps to being free from fear. Okay, so 3 steps to being free from fear. We're going to pull it up on the screen here. All right, the first one is face it. Identify the fears holding you back. The second one is frame it. See God's bigger plan for your life. And the third one is fight it. Use faith-filled practices to overcome fear. All right, turn to your neighbor. I know you already did this, but let's just do it again. All right, turn to your neighbor and say, hey, it's time to be free from fear. And I mean it this time. All right, this first one here is step 1 is to face it. Identify the fear holding you back. You know, when I was reading this story, I couldn't help but ask the question, how did we get here? Like, how did we get where this dude that did such cool things, so many great miracles, helped so many people, now he's on trial in the middle of the night? And crazy thing, not just by some, people that don't know God, but the very people that represent God is putting God on trial and trying to kill him. Like, this is wild. So, but if we look at a little bit deeper into the Gospels and the story and leading up to this moment, we can at least see why these religious leaders were threatened by Jesus. So a few reasons why they wanted to kill Jesus. The first one is Jesus was a threat to their power. Jesus was a threat to their power. So Rome was occupying Israel. Okay, they had to pay taxes. They had to do what they said. And so Rome had also pretty much bought the priesthood. And so you had, Herod had appointed the high priest at that time, Caiaphas, and they were run by a family, and there was this exchange of money, and it was all very, very corrupt. It was very corrupt. And so the priesthood was worried, specifically Caiaphas and his family, were worried that if we make Rome mad, then they're going to take our power away from us. And so they saw Jesus as Jesus is coming into town. He's riding on a donkey. Everybody's like, hey, putting down their palm branches. Like, Jesus is going to be king. Like, what's going to happen if we do this? So they were scared of Rome, is what they were. They were scared. So Jesus was a threat to their power. Second, Jesus was a threat to their money. Remember, Jesus just a few days ago went into the temple and overthrew a bunch of money changers. And the reason he did that was because on Passover, people would travel a long ways, and so they didn't bring an animal to sacrifice, so they would have to purchase an animal when they got there. But what the Caiaphas and his whole family, they would jack up the prices big time. Or if somebody did bring an animal, they would have somebody examining the lamb and say, oh, sorry, there's something wrong with this one. You're going to have to buy ours. And it was this big money-making scheme. And so Jesus went in there and was like, no, my Father's house shall be called a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of thieves. And so obviously they were concerned about losing a bunch of money. The third reason is Jesus was a threat to their influence. Remember, Jesus had done all these crazy, awesome things. Jesus was a better preacher. He did more miracles. He actually listened to the people. He cared for the people. Jesus did everything better than the religious leaders. And the religious leaders, they were afraid. They were afraid. In fact, if you look at it, you can kind of see how this whole thing is spelled out in John chapter 11, verse 47. You can kind of see Caiaphas and his thugs, what they were doing to plan this plot against Jesus. It says this in John chapter 11, verse 47. It says this, here is this man performing many signs. So they're talking about Jesus. Jesus is doing all these miracles. He's doing all these cool things. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. Heaven forbid. Everyone believe in Jesus. Oh no. But here's what they were scared of. One of the things they were scared of. I mentioned this earlier. And then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. So what's interesting about this is like, hey, is it the Messiah who you were actually waiting for? Like, and then Jesus showed up on the scene, and now they want to kill him. It's crazy. Verse 49, then one of them named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it's better for you that one man die for the people than for the whole nation to perish. Verse 51, he did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. Verse 53, this is it. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. So all these people, Caiaphas and his thugs, this was their moment, this was their chance. They got him arrested, they took him, and then they said, hey, if we don't get rid of Jesus, Jesus is going to get rid of us. And so they were afraid. They were afraid of losing their position. They were afraid of losing money. They were afraid of losing power. They were afraid of losing their influence. At their core, they were simply afraid. Now let me ask you, if we were to go and we were to go into that trial in the middle of the night, and we were to step into that scenario for a second, and we were to ask Caiaphas and all the others that were working with him, if we were just to ask them, hey, pause for a second, time out. Hey, are you guys actually just afraid? Are you just afraid? Do you think they would say yes? No, they would not admit that they were afraid. But indeed, they were afraid. They were afraid of what Jesus might do. And that's the thing about feelings. Feelings oftentimes can be blinding, right? Feelings can be blinding. We don't even realize what our motivations are, what's driving us. I hesitated to maybe even put this in the sermon, but just a moment of vulnerability for me on my journey. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this and trying to understand your motivations, but when I go to a Mexican restaurant and they bring out the chips, they bring out so many chips, and I just keep eating them, and I just keep eating them. And if you go to El Potro, they bring out queso with the chips, and I eat the chips, and I eat the queso, and I eat the salsa, and I eat so much of it. And then by the time my fajitas get there, I think, what have I done? I've eaten so many chips, but you know what? I find a way, and I eat the fajitas as well. And at the end of my fajitas, I see a few more chips. Yes, they're small, but you know what? I find a way to grab them, and then I dip them. And then I eat those too. And then at the end of my meal, I think, what have I done? What was my motivation behind all this? Because my feelings are blinding. I oftentimes are like, what am I doing? But you know what? Feelings can be blinding. You know what fear doesn't do? Fear doesn't show up on the scene and say, hey, it's fear again. I'm here to ruin your life. It's me. I'm here to make your marriage terrible, make your kids not like you, possibly get you fired from your job. Like, fear doesn't show up like that. Oftentimes what fear actually does is it identifies as something else. Your fear oftentimes says, no, it's your spouse's fault. It's your kid's fault. It's your boss's fault. It's your dog's fault. Fear is wanting to point to something else. Let me show you how this works. For the Caiaphas and the high priest, they didn't see that fear was driving them. And so who did they blame? Jesus. It's his fault. He's the reason this is all happening. Man, but you know what? When your life is led by fear, you can do some really terrible things. Even crucify the Savior. Man, they were driven by fear. They were driven by fear. What if they had stopped just for a minute and said, what am I afraid of? What am I afraid of? Just took a time out and said, what am I afraid of? It just took a little bit of humility, a little bit of time, a little bit of consideration, and said, what is driving me right now? What am I actually afraid of? So what if we took a moment and said, what am I actually afraid of? What am I afraid of? Maybe for you, it's about money. Maybe it's not having enough. Maybe it's about failing or losing something or someone. Maybe it's about missing an opportunity. Maybe it's not ending up where you want to be. Maybe it's worried about being unloved or being forgotten or not being able to leave a legacy. I think we all struggle with fears, but we've got to be honest what's actually motivating us and say, is this fear motivating me? What are we afraid of? So overcoming fear, the first step is got to just be to identify it, to face it, to be honest with ourselves. You know what's driving me? Is this fear is actually driving me, which leads to the second point here. Step number 2, you got to frame it. Okay, you got to frame it. Everybody say frame it. Frame it. See God's bigger plan for your life. Okay, so again, think about this story. It's crazy. There's so much chaos going on. The religious leaders are flooded with fear, and they're projecting it all over Jesus. And yet in the middle of this, Jesus is being silent. He's essentially being calm. I mean, you think about this, like, think about the last time you were falsely accused of something. Did you stay silent? No. Your spouse says, hey, you left the door unlocked. No, I didn't. Somebody in the car looks at you, they smell something, they say, hey, come on, couldn't you have waited? Like, bro, I didn't do it. We're passing a skunk or something. You know, none of us, when we're falsely accused, we're just quick, man. We're like, no, I didn't. I didn't do that. But not Jesus. He was able to stay calm. He was able to stay quiet. Like, how was he able to do that? That's the question I want to ask. How is he able to do that? So I want to read some passages to you that I think reveals the answer to this. All right, Mark chapter 10, verse 45 says this. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. John chapter 10, verse 11, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Isaiah 53:10, yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. The will of the Father for Jesus was that Jesus would go to the cross. And Jesus knew that was the Father's plan. Jesus knew this was God's will for me. And so in the middle of that trial, he was able to remain calm because he says, you know what? These circumstances right here, they're not going to derail God's plan. This is all a part of God's plan. I think we'll pull this up on the screen. But when you know God's path for you, you're not afraid of something derailing that. Fear then loses its power. Loses its power. Jesus didn't have to be afraid because he trusted the Father. He's like, hey, this is all part of God's plan. This is all a part. Now for Jesus, it was a tough plan. It was a pretty rough one. God doesn't have the same plan for you. Okay, he's got a great plan. He's got an awesome plan. For Jesus, this was the Father's plan. And you think about every gut-wrenching moment up to this point. Jesus was reframing all of those situations with this, the Garden of Gethsemane, where he's praying and he's sweating blood because he has so much anguish on him. When he was betrayed by Judas with a kiss, when he was arrested by the mob, and now he's on trial being falsely accused in the middle of the night. How was he able to endure things like that and stay calm? He was able to reframe it. He was able to say, you know what, I'm going to take these circumstances and I'm going to place them in the frame that God has for me. This is the Father's plan. I'm able to take these situations and say, you know what, God's able to work through these situations. I'm not outside of his plan. I don't have to be afraid of them. Nothing's going to derail it because I can trust in God. And you think about your house. Whenever you have a nice picture, memories in your life, you know, maybe you get a photo shoot with your family. You don't just take those pictures and use like sticky tack and put them up on your wall, right? You don't just stick, you know, the photo up on the wall. You put it in a frame, right? You put it in a frame. And that's what Jesus was doing. He's like, hey, this situation right here, I've got to frame it. I've got to frame it so I can put it up on my wall. And maybe for you today, you can look back on some situations. Maybe you're in one right now, and you need to frame it and say, you know what? God's got a plan in all this. I can trust the Father. And you just need to frame up your circumstances. I love what Psalm 34 says. It says this, I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all of my fears. Maybe for you, you're like, man, I'm not sure what God's plan is for me. Then you would just take that time to seek the Lord, to spend time with him. And as you spend time with the Lord, it starts to become clearer and clearer what God's plan is for you. As you get closer to God, you start to get more and more reassured, hey, God's with me. So then when you experience circumstances that are challenging, you don't have to be afraid. You don't have to worry. Maybe for you, you take another step toward God and start seeking him. And as you start seeking him, you start to see your fears melt away. When you know what the plan of God is, you can move forward in confidence despite fearful circumstances. I love what Corrie ten Boom says. It says this, never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. Maybe you look at your present circumstances and you're just like, man, this is challenging. I'm afraid of the future. This is not looking good. What if you reframed that and said, God, I'm going to trust you because I know you. I can trust you. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I can trust in you. I think we'll pull this up on the screen. Our worry might look at the present and say the future doesn't look good. Or we can reframe it and say the present isn't a problem because I know God has a plan for me and it's a good plan. All right, step number 3. Everybody say number 3. You got to fight it. You got to fight it. Use faith-filled practices to overcome. You know, sometimes you have to act not afraid to learn to not be afraid. Sometimes you just got to act not afraid to learn to not be afraid. I know this happened over the last couple of years. I can't remember how long ago it was, but I like roller coasters. Anybody else like roller coasters? Yeah, I'm the roller coaster dad. I always go on the kids with the roller coasters, and it's awesome. Except for one time, they have, it was an awesome roller coaster, but it had, one of those, it pulls over, and you have one of these teens that was like Captain Hulk, and he pushed the restraint on me really tight. And at first I was like, oh, this is not a problem. And then I was like, I can't take a full breath. I can't. And I'm kind of claustrophobic. Anybody else claustrophobic? Oh my goodness. So I start panicking. Like as I'm on the roller coaster, I'm like freaking out. I'm like, and do I say something? And and by that point, we're starting to go. Like there's no getting off this thing. So I had to kind of fake it. This is so embarrassing. I started going, and I was so freaking out. So what I started to do was I started forcing myself to laugh on the ride. So I'm going on the roller coaster, scared to death, and I go, ha 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 ha! I love this. This is so cool. You know what? It actually kind of helped. It actually did kind of help. And but then I was like, I'm never riding a roller coaster again. That was such a terrible experience. I'm not riding again. I was like, I can't do that. I'm a roller coaster dad. So I was like, all right, I'm going to start small. And so there we this is a little bit ago, but we went to Disney World, and I was like, I gotta get back on the roller coaster. This is the right thing for me. I gotta do this. And so then there was Slinky Dog. Slinky Dog, kind of a kid's roller coaster, yes. But you know what? It helped me. Okay, it helped me take a little baby step in the right direction. Okay, and sometimes that's what you got to do. And so what does Jesus do in this circumstance? We already covered it a little bit, but he was silent. Jesus remained silent. Despite of all the challenges, how was he able to do that? Because he trusted the Father. He trusted the Father. Now let me ask you, where are all my action-oriented people? Like you just attack life. Like you just get after it. Come on, let me see your hand. Okay, we got a few in here. All right, so you just like get after it. Okay, so this will be a lesson for us. Sometimes we need to be silent. Sometimes we need to pause. I know for me, I've sometimes got ahead of myself so often, and we can learn from Jesus in this moment, sometimes motivated by fear, and I've said, oh man, I've made some mistakes, when I should have been silent. For Jesus, he was silent. So sometimes we just got to practice. I'm going to bite my tongue. Oh, no, I'm not going to quite act on that yet. I'm going to wait just a moment. Sometimes we've got to be silent. But then there's other times when we need to speak up. Okay, I won't make you raise your hand, okay? This might be embarrassing, but many of us are people pleasers. okay? Probably all of us struggle with that to some level. And so sometimes it's hard for us to speak up, but look what Jesus does in verse 64. So he was silent, and then Caiaphas said, hey, you need to, I adjure you in the name of God, tell us, are you the Messiah? And then he says this, you have said so, Jesus replied, but I say to all of you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Jesus just dropped a bunch of truth on him. It was 100% true what he just said. But you know what? It would be that statement right there that would condemn him. He knew by saying that statement right there, it's over. There's no going back at this point. He's going to be found guilty, and they're going to say, crucify him. Jesus knew telling the truth would cost him. But that's such a lesson for us. Such a lesson for us. How many times do we not tell the truth to our boss, to our spouse, to our friends, because we're afraid? We're afraid. We're afraid of what they might think. We're afraid of what they might do. There's sometimes when we need to not give in to our fear. We need to say, you know what? I'm going to tell the truth no matter what it costs. We have to be careful that we aren't using niceness as a cover for fear. We can think we're nice, but we're really just bottling it up because we're afraid of people. And God wants to call us out of that. In fact, I love what Psalm 56 says. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. In God, whose word I praise. In God I trust. I shall not be afraid. What can flesh do to me? In other words, what can humans do to me? I can tell the truth, just like Jesus told the truth, even though he knew it was going to cost him. And here's what happens. When you find yourself actually telling the truth, it becomes easier to tell the truth. Like, oh, yeah, I didn't get fired. Oh, they actually did want to know what I really thought. Oh, they're actually not as mean as I thought they would be. You know what? I can tell the truth. You might be thinking like, well, no, I'll get fired for sure at my job if I say something. If you say something in the right time, with the right heart, in a mature way, and you get fired for telling the truth, then God has something better for you anyway. He's got a better place for you. That's not where you need to be. So we have to learn to speak the truth. So some of these small practices, sometimes we need to be silent. We need to just trust God. You know what? I don't have to attack that. I don't have to stop this situation. I don't have to let fear drive me. I need to be silent. Sometimes, though, fear is what's keeping us from talking. Fear is what's holding us back. And so sometimes you need to speak up and tell the truth like Jesus did. And then this last one, a practice that you can have, is acknowledging God's love. Acknowledging God's love. I love what Romans chapter 8, verse 15 says. For you did not receive a spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. If you're a child of God, you've been adopted by God himself. Just love that. The other day, I was feeling some fear, and I was like kind of getting, overthinking things, and I was letting fear take over. And I just paused and I stopped for, it was ironic that was this week I'm talking about fear. And I stopped and I paused for a moment, and then I thought of Romans chapter 8. And I said, God, I know that today that you love me. I know yesterday you loved me, and I know tomorrow you'll love me. But I also believe that today, right now in this moment, you love me. And if you love me, oh man, I'm good. I'm good. Romans chapter 8 says this, for I'm convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. And isn't that good? Yeah, it's so good. Sometimes what you need to quench your fear is to be reminded that God loves you. I know it's so simple. I know it's not complex, but think about this. The God of the universe that has it all. It'd be one thing if someone who's powerful here on earth loves you and likes you and wants to help you. It's like, oh, that's cool. Man, they got a lot of money. They got a lot of stuff. But, man, God is so much beyond that. He has so much more power. He is so much better. He's so much better. And he loves you. Man, if that's true, I'm good. And that's how Jesus, in the middle of the craziness, was able to stay calm. Everyone else driven by fear, but not Jesus. And today, I just want to encourage you with this. Is your life driven by fear? Man, it will make a mess of it. It will. You probably already know that and experienced that. But if you'll step into what God has for you to finally be free from fear, you can do what Jesus did. No matter what you face, you can stay calm and be free from fear.